They watched the game while I took my last breath. I watched them read the letter. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of my Boston brownstone, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floors I'd polished every Saturday for 37 years. The silence in this house had become my constant companion, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of traffic on Commonwealth Avenue. At 72, I had grown accustomed to the solitude, but today felt different. Today, the emptiness seemed to press against my chest with an unusual weight. My name is Margaret O'Sullivan, and I spent 45 years teaching 3rd grade at St. Catherine's Elementary. I raised 2 sons in this very house after my husband Patrick passed from cancer when the boys were still teenagers. I sacrificed my dreams, my savings, and countless nights of sleep to ensure Michael and Danny had everything they needed. I worked double shifts at the school's aftercare program, tutored neighborhood children on weekends, and even cleaned offices downtown just to pay for their college tuition. Every decision I made, every dollar I saved, every prayer I whispered was for them. Hey everyone, I need you to do me a huge favor right now. If this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because we really do help families going through situations like this. We're here for you, and together we can make a difference. Now, let me continue with what happened next. The chest pains started on a Tuesday morning in March. Boston was experiencing one of those brutal late winter storms that seemed to seep cold directly into your bones. I was in my kitchen, preparing my usual breakfast of oatmeal and tea, when a sharp, stabbing sensation shot through my left shoulder and down my arm. The wooden spoon I'd been stirring with clattered to the floor as I gripped the granite countertop, gasping for breath. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A crushing weight that made me feel like an elephant was sitting on my chest. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone on the kitchen table. The first number I dialed was Michael's. My eldest son, now 43, lived in Chicago where he worked as a financial advisor. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Mike. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. His voice sounded so casual, so disconnected from the terror I was experiencing. Michael, it's Mom. I managed to whisper into the phone, my voice barely audible over my labored breathing. I think I'm having a heart attack. Please call me back. I need you. With shaking fingers, I tried Danny's number. My younger son, 39, was a marketing executive in Los Angeles. The phone rang endlessly before his voicemail picked up. Hey, this is Dan. You know what to do. The beep that followed felt like a death sentence. Danny, please. I gasped into the phone. I'm in trouble. I need help. Call me back, sweetheart. Please. The pain intensified, radiating from my chest down both arms and up into my jaw. I could taste copper in my mouth, and my vision began to blur around the edges. The ceramic mug I'd been holding slipped from my fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor, the pieces scattering like my hopes that either of my sons would call back. I somehow managed to dial 911, though I could barely speak when the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? The woman's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to my panic. Heart attack, I wheezed. I think I'm having a heart attack. Ma'am, I need your address. Can you tell me where you are? Through sheer force of will, I managed to give her my address on Marlborough Street. My sons, I gasped. I called my sons, but they didn't answer. Help is on the way, ma'am. Stay on the line with me. Are you experiencing chest pain? The next few minutes were a blur of sirens, paramedics rushing through my front door, and being loaded onto a stretcher. As they wheeled me out of the house I'd called home for decades, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Chun from next door, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. She was the only witness to what might have been my final moments in the place where I'd raised my family. The emergency room at Massachusetts General was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency, hooking me up to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic life. Dr. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s with gentle hands and tired eyes, explained that I'd suffered a massive heart attack and would need immediate surgery. Do you have any family we can call? She asked, preparing to insert an 4 into my arm. My sons, I whispered, giving her their numbers. Michael in Chicago and Danny in Los Angeles. We'll try to reach them, she assured me. Right now, we need to focus on getting you stable. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I closed my eyes and thought about the last time I'd seen both my boys. It had been Christmas nearly 4 months ago. They'd each stayed for exactly 2 days, not a minute longer. Michael had spent most of his visit on work calls, even during Christmas dinner. Danny had been glued to his phone, posting pictures on social media of our family meal with captions like, "Home for the holidays with the fam." But neither of them had really been present. Neither of them had asked how I was doing, if I was lonely, if I needed anything. The surgery took 6 hours. When I woke up in the cardiac intensive care unit, my chest felt like it had been split open and sewn back together with barbed wire. Tubes and wires connected me to a symphony of medical equipment. The first thing I did was ask the nurse if my sons had called. "Let me check with the desk," she said kindly. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she had the sort of warm smile that reminded me of my former students' mothers. She returned a few minutes later with a sympathetic expression.
"I'm sorry, mistress. O'Sullivan."
"We haven't heard from them yet, but the hospital did leave messages at both numbers you provided." That was Thursday evening. By Friday morning, my phone had remained silent. By Friday afternoon, I was beginning to understand something that broke my heart more thoroughly than any cardiac episode ever could. My sons, the 2 human beings I devoted my entire adult life to nurturing and supporting, had not yet found the time to return a call about their mother's brush with death. It was Jennifer who finally brought me the news on Saturday morning. She approached my bed with a tablet in her hands and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I was able to reach your son Michael this morning." My heart monitor began beeping faster as hope surged through me. "Is he coming? Are they both coming?" Jennifer's pause said everything. He asked me to tell you that he and his brother are at some sort of championship game this weekend. He said it's been planned for months and they can't get away. He said to tell you they're thinking about you and they'll try to visit next week if their schedules allow. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my heart skip a beat, causing one of the machines to emit a sharp alarm. A championship game. My sons had chosen a sporting event over their mother's life hanging in the balance. "What kind of game?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. He mentioned it was some sort of fantasy football championship. Something about a league they've been in for years. Fantasy football. I laid there in that sterile hospital room, connected to machines that were keeping me alive, and my sons were at a party celebrating pretend teams with pretend players while their very real mother recovered from very real surgery. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so devastating. That night, alone in the ICU with only the rhythmic beeping of monitors for company, I made a decision that would change everything. I asked Jennifer to bring me some paper and a pen. My hands were shaky, and the 4 made it difficult to write, but I managed to compose 2 letters, one for each of my sons. They weren't angry letters, though perhaps they should have been. They were honest letters. Letters that finally said all the things I'd been too afraid to say during 40 years of motherhood. I thought about Michael's wedding 5 years ago. I'd spent my entire retirement savings to pay for the reception he and his wife Sarah wanted at the Four Seasons. When they'd initially told me about their dream wedding, I could see the disappointment in their eyes when they realized they couldn't afford the venue. Without hesitation, I'd offered to help. I'd liquidated my pension fund, cashed out my life insurance policy, and even took out a loan against my house. "Mom, you don't have to do that," Michael had said, but his relief was palpable. I'd spent the next 3 years working part-time jobs to pay off that loan, but seeing his happiness had made it worthwhile. Or so I'd thought. Then there was Danny's big break in Los Angeles. He'd called me 2 years ago, frantic because he'd been offered a position at a major marketing firm, but he needed to relocate immediately and didn't have the money for deposits, moving expenses, and the first few months of rent in one of the most expensive cities in America. Once again, I'd emptied my savings account. I'd sent him $8,000, money I'd been saving for home repairs that desperately needed to be done. My roof still leaked in 3 places, and my heating system was so old it barely functioned, but Danny's career was more important than my comfort. Both times, My sons had been effusively grateful. They'd promised to pay me back when they got on their feet. Michael had sent me flowers for Mother's Day, and Danny had called regularly for about 6 months after his move. But gradually, the calls became less frequent. The promises to repay me were forgotten, and I became more of an afterthought in their increasingly busy lives. As I wrote those letters in my hospital bed, I realized that I had enabled this behavior my entire life. I had taught my sons that my needs were secondary, that my love was unconditional regardless of how they treated me, and that I would always be there to bail them out of any problem. I had raised them to see me not as a person with my own dreams and needs, but as an endless well of resources they could draw from whenever convenient. The letters took me 3 days to write. By Tuesday, I was stable enough to be moved to a regular room, and by Wednesday, the doctors were talking about discharge. Neither Michael nor Danny had called, though I'd received a generic get-well card that Michael's assistant had obviously sent on his behalf. The card was signed with his name, but I recognized his assistant's handwriting from the Christmas cards I'd received for the past few years. When Dr. Rodriguez came to discharge me on Thursday morning, she asked if someone would be picking me up. Hospital policy requires that cardiac patients have someone escort them home and stay with them for at least 24 hours, she explained. I called Michael first. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called Danny, and he actually answered, the first time I'd heard his voice since before my heart attack. Mom, how are you feeling? I meant to call earlier, but work has been absolutely insane. Danny, I'm being discharged today, and I need someone to pick me up from the hospital. The doctor says I can't be alone for the first day home. There was a long pause. Oh, Mom, that's today? I have this huge presentation tomorrow, and I'm literally working all night to prepare for it. Can you maybe ask someone else? What about Mrs. Chun next door? Mrs. Chun was 87 years old and used a walker. But I didn't bother explaining that to my son. It's fine, Danny. I'll figure something out. Thanks for understanding, Mom. You're the best. I'll call you this weekend. Okay? He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my hospital bed, wearing the same clothes I'd been brought in wearing 6 days earlier, and realized that I truly had no one. The boys I'd sacrificed everything for couldn't even spare a few hours to make sure their mother got home safely from the hospital. It was Mrs. Chun who ultimately came to my rescue. When I finally swallowed my pride and called her, she immediately enlisted her nephew Robert, a 40-year-old contractor who lived in Brookline. Robert not only picked me up from the hospital but insisted on stopping at the grocery store to stock my refrigerator and staying with me that first night to make sure I was stable. Your boys couldn't come? He asked gently as he helped me up the front steps of my house. They had other commitments, I replied, too ashamed to elaborate. That night, as Robert slept in my guest room and I lay in my own bed, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I was going to stop enabling my son's selfishness. I was going to stop sacrificing my own well-being for people who clearly didn't value it. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had chosen when they picked a football game over their mother's life. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Patricia Williams, who had handled my will and various legal matters for 20 years. Patricia, I need to make some changes to my estate planning. Of course, Margaret. What kind of changes are we talking about? I want to remove my sons as beneficiaries of my will and life insurance policies. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Margaret, are you sure about this? I mean, I know you're probably upset about something, but these kinds of decisions shouldn't be made when you're emotional. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. I want to donate everything to the American Heart Association and the St. Catherine's Elementary School Scholarship Fund. My sons have made it very clear where their priorities lie, and it's not with their mother. Patricia tried to talk me out of it, suggesting we wait a few weeks to see if I felt the same way after I'd had time to recover. But I was resolute. The papers were drawn up and signed within 10 days of my discharge from the hospital. The second part of my plan involved those letters I'd written in the hospital. I decided to wait until the perfect moment to deliver them, a moment when my sons would truly understand the magnitude of what they had lost. That moment came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after my surgery, I received a call from Michael. Mom, Sarah and I have been talking, and we think you should probably move closer to us. You know, after your heart attack and everything. We found this really nice assisted living facility in Chicago. It's expensive, but we figured you could sell the house and use that money for the monthly fees. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to sell my home, the house I'd raised them in, the house I'd mortgaged to pay for their educations and weddings, to fund my own exile to a nursing home while they were still young and healthy. They weren't offering to care for me or even to help with my care. They wanted me to disappear quietly into institutional care so they could continue their lives without the inconvenience of an aging mother. That's very thoughtful of you to research facilities, Michael, I said calmly. But I'm perfectly fine living in my own home. Mom, be realistic. What if you have another heart attack? What if something happens and no one finds you for days? At least in assisted living, there would be people around. The irony of his concern for my safety, coming from someone who couldn't be bothered to return a phone call when I was literally dying, was almost amusing. I appreciate your concern, but my answer is no. Look, Mom, we're just trying to do what's best for you. The house is way too big for one person anyway, and it's probably worth close to $2 million now with the Boston real estate market. That would cover your care for at least 15 years, maybe 20. $2 million. That's what I represented to them now, a line item in their financial planning. Not their mother who had worked 3 jobs to put them through college. Not the woman who had given up her own dreams so they could pursue theirs. Just a potential inheritance that needed to be managed efficiently. That conversation crystallized everything for me. It was time to mail the letters. I sent them both on the same day, certified mail requiring signatures. The letters were nearly identical, though personalized with specific memories and examples. I told them about the fantasy football championship that had been more important than their mother's life. I reminded them of every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd spent, every dream I deferred for their benefit. I explained how their absence during my crisis had shown me exactly how much my love and sacrifice had meant to them. And then I told them about the changes to my will. By the time you read this letter, I wrote, you will already know that I have removed you as beneficiaries from my estate. Every dollar I leave behind will go to causes that actually value selfless dedication and service to others. You chose a game over your mother's life, so I have chosen to give my life's work to people who understand what really matters. Michael called first, exactly 2 hours after signing for his letter. His voice was shaking with rage when I answered the phone. Mom, what the hell is this letter supposed to mean? You can't be serious about the will. I'm completely serious, Michael. This is insane. You're talking about millions of dollars. That's Danny's inheritance and my inheritance. An inheritance is a gift, not a guarantee, I replied calmly. And I choose to give my gifts to people who have earned them through loyalty and love, not genetic accident. We love you, Mom. Of course we love you. Love isn't something you declare, Michael. Love is something you demonstrate. When I was dying in my kitchen, calling out for my sons, where was your love? When I was having surgery and didn't know if I'd wake up, where was your love? When I needed someone to pick me up from the hospital and you couldn't spare a few hours, where was your love? That was one weekend, Mom. One bad weekend doesn't erase 40 years. It wasn't one weekend, Michael. It was the weekend that showed me what 40 years of my sacrifice had actually accomplished. I raised 2 men who think a fantasy football game is more important than their mother's life. Danny called 20 minutes later, and his approach was completely different. He was crying, actual tears, and his voice was broken with what sounded like genuine remorse. Mom, I read your letter, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You're right about everything. We were selfish and horrible, and I don't know how to make it right. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd held when he had nightmares, the son I'd loved unconditionally for 39 years. Danny, please, Mom, give us another chance. I'll quit my job and move back to Boston. I'll take care of you. We can be a family again. But then I heard something in the background of his call. The sound of laughter and music, the clink of glasses. He was at a party or a restaurant, making this supposedly heartfelt call surrounded by friends or colleagues. Even his apology was performed for an audience. Where are you right now, Danny? I'm I'm out with some clients. But Mom, this call is more important than any business dinner. Important enough to step outside? Important enough to go somewhere private where you can have a real conversation with your mother. The silence stretched between us. The thing is, this is a really crucial client, and I hung up. Both of my sons called repeatedly over the next several days. Michael tried various tactics: anger, bargaining, guilt. He even had Sarah call to tell me how disappointed she was in my vindictive behavior. Danny stuck with the tearful apology approach, but each call came at increasingly inappropriate times, suggesting that I was still just being squeezed into the margins of his busy life. After a week, the calls stopped. I suppose they had both consulted lawyers and confirmed that I was perfectly within my rights to disinherit them. Massachusetts doesn't have laws requiring parents to leave anything to their children, especially when those children are financially independent adults. The peace that followed was profound. I was no longer waiting for phone calls that would never come. I was no longer making excuses for their absence or rationalizing their neglect. I had finally released myself from the burden of loving people who didn't love me back. 6 months later, I had another visitor, Robert Chun, Mrs. Chen's nephew, who had helped me the day I came home from the hospital. He knocked on my door on a rainy Saturday afternoon in October. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. My aunt asked me to check on you." "Of course not, Robert. Please, come in." Over tea in my kitchen, he told me that his aunt had been worried about me since my heart attack. "She sees you sometimes, working in your garden or walking to the market, but she says you seem lonely." I was about to give him my standard response about being fine, but something in his kind eyes stopped me. "I suppose I am lonely," I admitted, "but I'm learning to be at peace with it." "Maybe you don't have to be lonely," he said quietly. "I mean, I know we barely know each other, but I've been thinking about what you went through with your sons. My aunt told me a little bit about it, and it made me angry, you know? You seem like such a good person." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Robert was recently divorced, had no children, and worked as a general contractor specializing in historic home restoration. He was gentle and funny, and when he smiled, I saw traces of the young man who had dropped everything to help a stranger get home from the hospital. "Would you maybe like to have dinner sometime?" he asked as he was leaving. "Nothing fancy, just 2 people who could use some company." I said yes. That was 8 months ago. Robert and I have been seeing each other regularly since then. He's helped me repair the roof and the heating system, repairs I'd been putting off for years because I'd given all my money to my sons. We take walks along the Charles River, go to museums, and share quiet dinners where we actually talk to each other instead of staring at our phones. For the first time in decades, I'm not taking care of someone else. I'm not sacrificing my own needs and desires for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. I'm simply being Margaret, not just a mother, but a woman with her own interests, her own opinions, her own right to happiness. I still think about Michael and Danny sometimes. I wonder if they've learned anything from losing their inheritance, if they've examined their own behavior and found it lacking, if they've grown into better men. I hope they have, for their own sakes and for the sakes of their future families. But I no longer wonder if they'll call, and I no longer wait by the phone hoping for crumbs of affection. The most surprising thing about this whole experience has been discovering who I really am when I'm not constantly trying to earn love through sacrifice. I've started painting again, something I gave up 40 years ago because I needed to work extra jobs to support my family. I volunteer at a literacy program for immigrant women, teaching them English so they can build better lives for their own families. I've joined a book club and made friends with women who have their own stories of resilience and reinvention. Last month, I received a wedding invitation. It was from Michael. He and Sarah are renewing their vows for their 10th anniversary, and apparently they wanted to include me in their celebration. The invitation was beautiful, expensive, and impersonal. There was no handwritten note, no acknowledgement of our estrangement, no apology for choosing a football game over their mother's life. Just an engraved request for my presence at their party. I sent a polite decline. I had other plans that weekend. Robert was taking me to see a play at the Huntington Theater. We were going to dinner first at a little Italian restaurant in the North End, And then we were going to hold hands in the dark theater and watch professional actors tell someone else's story of love and loss and redemption. I don't regret the 40 years I spent devoted to my sons. They needed me then, and I was happy to give them everything I had. But I also don't regret taking my life back when it became clear that their need had transformed into exploitation, that their love had conditions I could never meet. The letters I wrote in that hospital bed weren't acts of revenge. They were acts of liberation. I was finally telling the truth about what love looks like, about what sacrifice should accomplish, about what family really means. Family isn't just about shared blood or obligation. It's about showing up. It's about being there in the moments that matter. It's about putting someone else's well-being ahead of your own convenience, even when it's difficult. Arthur Chun understood that when he picked up a stranger from the hospital. Robert understands it when he spends his Saturday afternoons fixing my gutters instead of watching football. My students' parents understood it when they trusted me with their most precious treasures for 9 months out of every year. My sons never learned it, despite 40 years of my trying to teach them through example. But that's their loss now, not mine. Today, as I write this story, the autumn light is streaming through those same lace curtains that have hung in my windows for decades. But everything else has changed. The silence in this house is no longer oppressive. It's peaceful. I'm no longer waiting for phone calls or making excuses for other people's behavior. I'm simply living my own life on my own terms, surrounded by people who value the same things I do. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop giving it to people who don't appreciate it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself. Choose your own peace. Choose your own happiness. I chose myself, and for the first time in 40 years, I'm exactly where I belong.